Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I am Reagan Kelly, and I am joined this week by two awesome co-hosts.
Nate Heininger.
And Shane Kelly.
And this is our second episode about IFComp 2019. So if you're new to the show or new to IFComp, first of all, last episode we gave a intro to the competition and explained how our coverage works and all of that, so I won't retread that same material. If you're somehow jumping in here, you'll feel free to jump back to that one. But we are going to be talking about some more IFComp games that we've played, and I'm excited to get into it. Before I do, I want to remind everybody that this podcast is supported by patrons like you on Patreon. You can find us at www.theshortgame.net or on Patreon at patreon.com/theshortgame. And we're having a lively discussion about all of the games we're playing on IFComp in our IFComp channel on our Discord, which is exclusively for patrons at any level. So if you are wanting to chat with us about the games that you're playing in IFComp, we are excited to have those conversations. You can find us on Twitter, or of course you can join us on our Discord, and we'd be happy to have you there.
Yeah, I have particularly benefited from the conversations going on in the IFComp channel. That has been helpful to see what everyone else is playing, get some insight about what has been good and what's worthwhile. Similarly, the Apple Arcade channel has been very helpful. So to the people that are in our Discord currently, thank you. And to those who are considering joining, get on in here.
Yeah, thank you, Nate.
You know, the Discord really actually has been a really nice place to kind of make new friends and just sort of shoot the shit about not just the short games that I'm playing, but the long games that I'm playing. We probably won't be doing a Making Us Happy this week, but because this is going to be a long one, but last week was my birthday, and Reagan sent me a game in the mail, and it was Control, and it's a long game, and I probably will barely get to play it, but it rules, and I'm already enjoying talking about it with people in the Discord.
Yeah.
Are you not legally obliged to say our birthday when you're in the presence of your twin? I don't know. I don't know how twins
How did
work,
I phrase it then? Did I say my birthday? Reagan, it was our birthday.
Yeah,
yes.
You said my birthday.
It's equally mine.
Yeah.
Yes. Reagan got me a sweet video game, and I got him a dorky wristwatch. So, I don't know who came out on top there.
It's a pretty good wristwatch. It has Garfield on it. So, sorry, all of that aside, let's get back into talking about the games of IFComp 2019. I'm excited to talk about some of the ones that I played this week. I feel like overall more, I have lots of ups and downs with this year's comp, and a sort of microcosm of that is the first game that I played for the comp this year. Not first game, the first game that I want to talk about this week. So the first game I wanted to go into is Skies Above by Arthur DiBianca. And, if you've been following the comp for a while, you're probably familiar with that name. Arthur DiBianca has made a bunch of games that have done well in comps in past years. I remember really liking Grandma Bethlinda's Variety Box. He did really, really well with Inside the Facility, I think. I forget where it placed, but Inside the Facility was very well regarded. And I think last year was The Wand. And The Wand is extraordinarily complicated puzzle game. The thing about Arthur DiBianca's games is that I feel like a sort of a complicated relationship with them. I super respect them, but I also and I always play them, but I also almost never finish them because they're all usually just these incredibly complex puzzles that mostly go over my head. And his games are very much more games than stories. They're very puzzle heavy and very much about sort of setting up big puzzle ideas and sort of working through these complex puzzle systems. The Wand had you going around with a wand that could do just a zillion different things by dialing in various different little rings on the wand in various different combinations and kind of trying to decipher what the pattern there was. Very complicated.
Yeah. Only one person on this show is Laura, and it's not. You is not me. It's not Jane. That is very much a Laura game.
Yeah, that was a very much a Laura game. I was very excited to play Skies Above because it's a different sort of game for Arthur DiBianca, and I bounced off it in a very different sort of way. so this game is very different in that it's not actually all that puzzle focused. There are definitely puzzles, but it's got an interesting structure. You are a airship captain, and you're trying to sort of power up your airship to be able to reach more of these floating islands that are sort of floating in this sea of sky. And in order to do that, you have to collect floatrons, which are particles that float, I presume. And there's lots and lots of different places you can go. And in each place, almost or most of the places, there is an activity you can do that functions kind of like. So I think the game refers to them as mini games. I think that's stretching the definition of mini games a little bit. They are little micro tasks. So a quick example would be that one of the first places you can find is that there is a pump at a particular place, and once per day you can go to that pump, and you literally have to hit the U and D keys on your keyboard to move the pump up and down, up and down, up and down. You do that maybe a few dozen times to pump out a few floatrons, right? And the sort of loop of the game is that you have in each in-game day, you can do a certain number of types of work, types of activities. Each of these activities is something that, many of them have some kind of component like that, where they're a little bit tedious, right? By design, they're designed to be a little bit tedious. They're not something that's like exciting to do. But you have to kind of figure out, okay, I've got all these different options open to me. What do I do to make the most floatrons per day? So you're kind of fighting against sort of by design tedium, right? Like
does it have like some elements of like an idle game where you're like, turning floatrons into flotronators that
my God, I was so expecting that, right? When I saw this, I thought, oh, this reminds me of some of the mechanics of something like a dark room, or maybe that universal paper clips or something like that, right? Where you're going to be sort of setting up, where it's not just about optimization, but it's more about sort of building an engine to generate things for you and eliminate the tedium for you. And if this game does that, I didn't get to it. It's mostly about optimization, but the optimization is not so much about like building a machine to get you floatrons. It's about trying to find to improve the efficiency of the tedious things that you're doing. So, for example, there's a gym you can go to work out in, and it improves your muscle stat. And that means that when you go to use the pump, you get more floatrons out of the pump. But you still have to go to the pump, and you still have to hit that UD several times in order to do it. So you're not like eliminating work for yourself. You're just making the work produce more for you. And by doing that, you're opening up new areas. So you get to float higher with your boat and explore new islands, and those unlock new places to go. I played this game for about 2 hours. That's kind of my limit on a game like this, where like I think it's well designed for what it does. But I was finding
it just sounds like it's fundamentally about grinding, right? Which is not something that you usually wanted. It's not something that I usually expect out of interactive fiction.
Yeah, and so like I was expecting something like, building a system like universal paper clips, or something where I'd be able to find and exploit sort of, I don't know, trade or something like that, like something like Superluminal Vagrant Twin. And I didn't quite find that in this game. It was interesting, and I think it's a well-made and well-designed game, but I bounced off it in a way that was different from what I've bounced off of his games before. So apologies to Arthur DiBianca.
Well, keep putting him out there, Artie. If I can call you that.
He does well, right? Like, people love his games, and I have liked his games in the past. They are well-designed games, right? I think it's just like they're not for me, or like not all of them are. It's complicated. Like I said, I have a complicated relationship with them.
So I'm going to talk about a game that is maybe the opposite of what you were just talking about, Reagan. It's called Limerick Heist, and it is made by Pace Smith. And when I think about interactive fiction, fiction can accomplish a lot of things that basically any other style of video game cannot. And I never would have thought of this, but a Limerick-based game is solely in the realm of interactive fiction and probably not successful in any other capacity. And this game is very successful at making a Limerick-based game. And so it is also the most directly titled game that I've played in a long time. It is a heist. You are stealing a Fabergé egg, and the entire game, literally top to bottom, is limericks. There's never not anything that is presented to you in the form of a limerick. And it's a choice-based game, which is interesting. You actually I've played a couple interactive fiction games that are heists, and I think that's a pretty popular thing to make in interactive fiction. You pick your team. Each person on the team is a unique character. They have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. You pick the team. You go about the heist. You make selections all throughout the heist that determine whether you are successful or not in the heist. But the thing about this one is that the entire game is limericks. And it seems one of the most impressive parts about it is that, like, I don't know, it seems like no matter how you picked and who you picked, there was going to be a limerick for each version of the team that you made and each version of how the heist can go. There's a lot of different endings, as you would expect in a heist game, from incredibly successful to wildly unsuccessful. All of it presented to you in limericks. It's wild. It's really, really successful. So I thought I feel like I wouldn't be doing this game justice.
Yeah, I need to hear a limerick now, please.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do my best here because, again, the entire game. So I try to find some really good ones that express how confidently this game uses limericks. So here we go. Good evening, dear mademoiselle. Damn it.
Confidently.
All right. Let me try it again. I swallowed mademoiselle. All right.
Perhaps she'll die.
Good evening, dear mademoiselle. You hand her a red Zinfandel. I've one piece of cake with a Titanic take, one charm and one lift and one sell. Alas, I've been wined but not dined. How am I to make up my mind? Astute observations, I've made reservations. For two, she replied, you're too kind. At dinner, she says, so do share the particulars of this affair. You tell her the deal, but what's the appeal to a fashionable posh millionaire? And then you have the choice. You tell her the prize to be rated, or you tell her the job's destination. And then whichever one you select, it fills up the rest.
So even your choices are like the beginning line of a limerick?
The beginning. Literally, there is not a line in this game that is not a limerick. There's no exposition. It's the entire game is limerick based.
It's a feat of poetry, if nothing else.
It's wild. Like, I kept waiting for something, and there's flashbacks and it's a whole game of completing a heist, and the entire thing is done in limericks. I got one more. At the King's Oak disarray, guards running every which way, not comprehending who they're apprehending, believing the fake dossier. With so many felons odds on, security thinks there's a con. They're right, although tricked, about who they've picked to pin their suspicions upon.
Oh, I love it.
And then the next line is, verge as a guard now disguised. And then you tap on it, and it completes the rest of the limerick.
Oh, that's good. That's really neat.
There's 20 something different endings or right around there. I played through a couple of them. I never completely restarted the game and picked like a totally different crew, but it does have a couple times where you can like undo a decision to go back and try it in different ways. It's fun. It's super lightweight as far as the actual game mechanics. It's what I actually kind of want a lot of times in interactive fiction. I can definitely get behind those like complex puzzle games like you're talking about, Reagan, but this is something that like, again, this would only be successful in interactive fiction where you're just going to read a ridiculous amount of limericks and really appreciate the author's ability to tell an entire story in this rhyming pattern. Like I try to pick some ones that really show like they play around with the language of it, but the meter is always spot on, except for one time where there's even a joke about messing up a limericks meter. It's really
good.
funny. Yeah, it's really funny. The IFComp page says about an hour to complete, and I think that's really if you're gonna go through and play a lot of like play the whole game and get a whole bunch of endings, because you can really play through and pick an entire team and do a full run of the heist in probably 15-20 minutes. And you can really get an idea of the humor and the accomplishment, in my opinion, of this game really in the first like 5 or 10 minutes. There's a lot of jokes in there. Like for no reason, Teller of Penn and Teller is a character. There's a lot of references to other video games, specifically Metroidvania, which they do fit the word Metroidvania into a limerick, which is an accomplishment of its own. They play a lot with slant rhymes, but you kind of have to if you're going to do something like this. So I definitely recommend it. I don't know where it stands on like the pantheon of, complex and accomplished interactive fiction, but for me, this is often what I'm actually looking for in this sort of stuff. So I definitely recommend it. Check it out. It was a lot of fun, and at the very least, it's silly and good for a laugh.
That sounds like a blast.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the great things about the about IFComp is that I can really delve into the spirit of our show and play games that are ultra short. I can't think of very many games that we've done on this show that are in the 15 to 20 minute range. But every year for IFComp, we have a lot of those. And so I get to spend some time really checking out things that are in this sort of tiny micro game region. And so I'm going to talk about two right here. One is a bit of fan fiction, I think. It's called The Legendary Hero Has Failed by Tom Martin. And this one is kind of a quirky take on Majora's Mask.
I played this one too. I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. So I have never played Majora's Mask, and so I didn't really put this together.
Neither have I. Why did we both play this?
And why isn't Laura here?
Why isn't Laura here? Well, Nate, did you ever play Majora's Mask?
I never. Man, we're losing so much of our video game.
Worst gamers ever.
Our
apologies to Tom and to Nintendo.
Now, I definitely did play it, but it was like when it was contemporary, and I don't think that I ever truly finished it because I had a hard time finishing it. So
yeah, but I think we're all sort of familiar with its trappings, right? We may not get the specific references, but we're familiar with its general setup and vibe and weirdness.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Majora's Mask, I am told the hero of time, Link, is going through a time loop in which he is trying to prevent the moon from falling onto the Earth or to Hyrule or whatever, and killing everyone. And that happens over and over again until he succeeds. And I guess that this game takes place during one of those unsuccessful loops. And some characters who, at first I assumed must be from Majora's Mask, but maybe not, because I couldn't find evidence of them in my quick Google searches. But some of these characters are just sort of hanging out around a campfire, talking to one another, and you can kind of spend this last 5 minutes that you have reflecting with your friends and talking with them about the impending end of the world and kind of getting their take on the end of the world. And so I think that element of it was pretty good. Sadly, I've had a few games during the comp for me that didn't fully function. And for this one, it seemed like it made really clever use of graphics. But unfortunately, the graphics don't load for me in this game. There's
That's
an
funny.
opening image.
I had the exact same problem on this one.
I have read in someone else's review of this game that it had cool animations, which I guess maybe was some animated GIFs or something like that. And there was actually a really interesting piece of interaction that I managed to get through even without the picture. But what it seemed like was sort of a character asks you to lay back and look at the clouds with them. And asks you what you see in the clouds, and then it showed me like broken image, and then you can type something in, and I was like, I see a broken image, and it's like, yeah, there are clouds up there that look just like a broken image.
Aw.
So that was kind of a bummer. I really hope that gets up and running. I'd like to give this game another shot, just to see those animations and pictures. This is, I think, interestingly enough, this is one of two pieces of fanfic in the comp this year. There's also a Hogwarts-themed game that I haven't gotten to play yet.
Yeah, I forgot. I scrolled past that one, too. I haven't checked it out either. That's interesting. I mean, I know there have been things in the comp that have been, like, references, but I think I've seen more, like, interactive fiction references than I've seen straight up, like, references to, popular video games and films.
Yeah, you're more likely to see Andrew Plotkin than Harry Potter, I suppose.
Yeah.
But let's see. So I'm trying to cover these games quick because they are quick games. A game that I was kind of interested in, but then didn't totally fully hit for me, was a game called Lucerne by Dimitri Kaviani. And I immediately wanted to read it because Lucerne is my favorite brand of organic milk.
Okay.
But the game here is one of the more or less oddball pieces from the comp. Every year, if you're looking at these games that are in this kind of hyper short variety, a lot of them are sort of people's first efforts or are very experimental in some way, or they are also, because of their being so short, have kind of limited interaction. This one was extremely limited in its interaction, but let me give you an idea of what Lucerne is. Lucerne is the name of the title character, who's a young girl who is kind of bothered by her younger brother. And in order to get him to leave her alone and I guess go to sleep, she tells him a tale about a black king who lost his son and goes around stealing little boys. And the black king comes and steals her little brother, and she has to go and retrieve him. It's a story that really reminded me of The Labyrinth. There was some good writing to it, but what kind of bugged me about it is it really stretches the definition of interactive. It really does feel like maybe a story that I don't really think there is any interaction here. I think you get to the end of a page and you're essentially clicking on a next button to get to the next one until you've made your way through the story. So I don't know if this is one I would recommend because I just don't think it's what people are looking for in the IFComp, despite the fact that the writing was interesting enough that I finished it, but it didn't really hit for me. I am looking forward to talking about quite a few more of these little 15-minute super short games. I've got a longer list here.
I also could kind of do a paired couple of games here. So both of these are united by the fact that they are, I would say, kind of both artsy horror. And that might sound like sort of reductive. Artsy can sound like I'm poo-pooing it, but they are both like very artistically written and artistically presented with horror elements, but horror might not necessarily be like the number one genre I'd put on either of them. So I guess I'll start with The Good People by Sue David. I haven't played anything by Sue David before, but I looked, and apparently last year's sixth place winner, Master of the Land, was by Sue David, and I looked that up. Wow, I'm kind of sad that I skipped it last year because it sounds really, really neat, and it also won Best Implementation in the ZZ, or I never know how people pronounce these things, XYZZY awards last year, and sounds really cool. And this year, Sue David's entry is a Twine game, or at least I'm pretty certain that it's Twine, but it's extremely polished for a Twine game. It's extremely good looking and like well presented, and that was sort of the biggest sort of feature of it for me, is that it's done with extremely attractive text. He did I assume he did some really cool stuff with the text in the game, with things like animation and text placement in unusual ways or arrangements. It looks really, really cool. And there's some use of graphics that is minimal, but also I thought really tasteful and looked great. Apparently started with some copyright free or freely available images, but integrated them in a way that felt really organic and gave them all a unique and sort of stark visual look. It's an awesome looking game. And it starts off with a very personal story that doesn't really tip its hand. I don't think it's spoiling anything too much to say that it takes a turn towards horror, because horror is listed on its description on the IFComp page. But I won't spoil anything, or rather I'll do a spoiler break before I get to talking about that part of the game, because it is a big twist or turn or change about midway through. Before the sort of midpoint of the game, it reads as a sort of a very personal story about so I don't know any of the nationalities in this, so it's a little hard to talk about, but the central character, the main character, is returning to a country that he's left. So he's sort of an expat living abroad, and he's brought his foreign girlfriend back to his country of origin, and they've gone to visit a town that his, I think, great-grandparents lived in, but that after the time of his great-grandparents, it was flooded by the construction of a dam, and then in recent times, that dam has been moved, and so this town, or the remains of the town that he has this sort of ancestral connection to, are now exposed, and so he's there to take a look at it, but he's very uncomfortable about it. His girlfriend is some sort of travel writer and is much more enthusiastic about seeing this place, and I thought that the writing of that character and his discomfort with his own sort of heritage or estrangement from his heritage was really, really interesting, and it's about him sort of feeling a connection or lack of connection with, not just his like parents' generation, but like great grandparents. Like, he has stories about this place, but they are like 2 generations removed. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Then here's where it takes a rather sharp turn. And if you'd prefer to avoid any spoilers, you may go ahead and, use the chapter skip button. In this very stark and strange place, he starts encountering supernatural things, and the horror of it is very good, but I also thought had some things about it that really were in need of some work. So there's a creature that lives in this place that I won't go. That is not deeply described, but is set up in an incredibly unsettling, hair-raising way. When it's presented in the text, its name is just a vibrating, mishmash of characters that you can't read, which I thought was a really effective, cool Twine thing. And it's only very sparsely described, but it's extremely creepy. But it almost immediately sort of neuters the creepiness of this thing in a way that I thought was like strange to do. So like sets up this scene. You're walking into a building where you encounter this thing, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. The pacing with things like the animated text appearing on screen is like really building tension, and you encounter this scary thing, and then it flashes forward almost immediately to a scene that seems to be taking place maybe months later, where you're shopping for an apartment and you're back in wherever you're supposed to live, and this thing is there with you in your apartment, which is a weird, creepy thing, right? But that scene kind of neuters the creepiness of the creature, because it almost feels like this sort of funny domestic scene. Like I don't know whether that was meant to sort of heighten the creepiness, because there is this element of like, this thing has followed you home and is going to devour the people around you in a way. But there's like moments where he's the only one that can see this creature, and he's like kicking it out of the way so that like a realtor can walk past, things like that. And it's like it's that scene struck me as funny. And because it had that moment, it kind of like took a lot of the punch out of the scariness of the entire rest of the thing for me, and it took me out of it a little bit. So anyway, that was a bit of a disappointment, I thought. I didn't think it really executed on the horror very well. It executed very well on, I thought, the early part that was very artistically written and well presented. And when it started to take its turn towards horror, I thought it was really bringing me along, and then it didn't quite. So anyway, very cool game. I would absolutely recommend it. I think it's going to be on high up on a lot of people's lists. And I've read some responses from other folks who seem to have had a more bought in relationship with the horror elements of it than I did. But maybe I have particular tastes or something that maybe kept me out of that. And I had a kind of a similar response to another game in the list, Night Guard / Morning Star by Astrid Dalmati. Astrid wrote a game that I really, really loved a couple of years ago, I think, called Cactus Blue Motel. And I think it did really, really well in the comp. I forget where it placed, but like pretty high. And so I really, really liked that game, and I was extremely looking forward to playing this one too. So it's another one that sort of artistically presents something that uses some horror elements, but I don't feel like the horror is necessarily the sole focus. It's mostly a story about a woman and her relationship with her mother. The mother is a famous artist. Seems like sort of a outsider artist, or one of these artists that's meant to sort of speak for her people of her generation and national origin or race or something. I got a kind of a Frida Kahlo kind of vibe from the way they were describing her, although that's probably reductive. I'm just not that artistically clued in. But anyway, the daughter has a complicated relationship with her mother, where she clearly loves her mother, but has had to take care of her and has felt abused by her, and so on. And that story of their relationship is mostly told through this slightly creepy scenario where she's working as a night guard. Her mother got her a job guarding an exhibition of her mother's paintings. So she's all alone at night in a room surrounded by her mother's paintings. And suddenly one of the paintings disappears, and she has to basically go into each of the paintings, collecting objects for a kind of a ritual to re-summon the painting that has gone. It felt to me like it was pretty minimally interactive. I found out later I'm wrong about that, which makes it very interesting in retrospect, but maybe didn't help so much in the moment. I am told that the game is tracking the way that you proceed through. It's all choice based. I don't know if I mentioned that, but apparently the game is tracking your state in some ways that weren't apparent to me, and that it has many endings. And I had no inkling of that when I played it. It felt quite linear to me at the time.
That's pretty cool.
It's interesting, right? Like,
yeah.
I thought that the stuff about the relationship with the mother was interestingly carried off and well written. I did kind of feel like the process of the game was like, okay, once I realized sort of what was going on, it was sort of like click each painting, you appear in a scene that tells you something about your mother's life and relationship. You find some object, click it to collect it, get back out of the painting, and eventually end the game. I don't know. I didn't respond quite as much to this as I did to something like Cactus Blue Motel. That felt like a really fun, cool. It was still creepy and it was, I don't know, fun and cool may sound like, I don't know, whatever. I just really enjoyed that game, and it felt like a really cool episode of The Twilight Zone, right? Whereas this felt a little more like an episode of like Rod Serling's Night Gallery, which I didn't like as much as the television program. Similar kind of thing, but not quite the same. And maybe that was an expectation problem. And also maybe there were like hints at the sort of interactivity that I missed. I don't know. I think this is really an interesting game, and I think that a lot of folks are probably going to like it quite a lot. I think it's another one where maybe my particular expectations with regards to horror are not in line with this, because I didn't think it really carried that. The Good People, for example, I thought was much more effective as horror, and even it had some missteps that bothered me. This didn't really, I don't think, kind of function as horror, even though it's kind of listed as such. But it's interesting, and I'm curious to play it again, because finding out after the fact that it was much less linear than I thought, and I'm not really sure in what ways, is an interesting thing. So I'm more curious about this, having finished it, than I really was playing it. But I still recommend it, because I think Astrid Dalmati's writing is really, really good. So I'd still recommend people check this out.
So the next game I want to talk about, I kind of mentioned on the last game, Limerick Heist, that, you know, interactive fiction, and fiction in particular, can accomplish something that no other medium for storytelling can. And I really believe that fiction also does a really great job of putting you into a tone or a mood or a setting or a place that no other type of media can actually do like good, well-written fiction can. It's one of the hallmarks of the genre, right? You can actually put yourself into these scenarios, even if you're reading a story about someone else, way more than a movie or a video or a non-text-based video game, right? And so I played The Surprise, which was written by Candy Meldrumon. And this is a game that did a really good job of putting me into a position, a place that I would never be in real life, which is a woman who is looking at pregnancy tests. And it's very short. It's very simple. It's definitely like a mood piece, if you will. It is very light on the gameplay. You're more or less trying to solve what order. Solve's not the right word, but that's how it felt a little bit for me. But solve, like, where in the bathroom should I go and sit? And what order do I do the actions that you have to do to take a pregnancy test? And I won't spoil, you know, where it goes. But it was very, I think, purposefully simply written, and very effective. And I don't know, I enjoyed it. I think it's worth the like 10 minutes or so it takes to play. I think it definitely felt real for this person who wrote it, and it made it feel real for me as a reader. So that's really all that I have to say, because it was, again, I believe, purposefully very simple. But I think it's one of the cool things about fiction, that I don't think, like, watching a movie or watching a film of these actions happening, or even playing a graphic representation where you're like controlling a person who is like doing these things.
Press X to pee on strip.
Yeah, right. Like, that wouldn't be as effective as actually reading it was for this. So check it out. That's kind of all that I have to say. It's very effective, and I think highlights what strong written experiences can do over any other media format.
That's really cool.
I can't wait to talk about this next game. And I was a little unsure if I was going to like it when I read the title. But I also thought I probably would. This is the game Girth Loinhammer and the Quest for the Unsea Elixir. by Damon L. Wakes.
That is such a, I don't know. You're absolutely right. Like that's a title where I'm like, wow, I'm either gonna love or hate this.
Yeah. It was a gamble, and it really paid off. This was a absolutely hilarious game. And it was also implemented in a really interesting and clever way. So first off, Girth Loinhammer and the Quest for the Unsea Elixir is a choice-based game, but it is a choice-based game that incorporates some stuff outside the game in an effort to kind of emulate the old D&D game books. You remember the things that had you rolling dice and keeping a character sheet and things like that. And so to that end, this is a game that has you print off a character sheet.
Oh, look at that. Shane's holding his character sheet.
Yes. And it also has you get a couple of 6-sided dice to roll. And that it also, and so the character sheet kind of serves as a tracking device or a tracker for these various different keywords and tags that you kind of get as you play.
Shane, I'm so glad you played this game, because I opened this up. I was like, oh, I'm gonna download this thing. I'm gonna print it, and I was like, wait, I haven't had a printer for like 13 years. I'm gonna go to work, and I forgot to print it at work, and I'm just excited to hear if this is.
Well, you could probably get by. For those of you who might be wanting to play this game and don't have a printer, you could probably get by with just a piece of paper. And it'll be better if you have a couple of 6-sided dice. So hopefully you have those laying around your house. The first thing that this game asks you to do is to roll 2 6-sided dice and then subtract 15 from that, and to write that down as your self-esteem. And it asks you, click here if you have a self-esteem value that's greater than 0. Click here if you have a self-esteem value that's less than 0. Those of you who have done the math know that when you click it is greater than 0, it immediately tells you you are cheating, and to basically add the trait cheater to your character sheet.
Cute.
So the idea with this game is you are Girth Loinhammer, and through a few choices that you'll make early on in the game, you will see something that you wish you could unsee. And that will add some sort of trait to your character sheet. In my case, the trait was grossed out by goblins.
Classic.
And the Girth Loinhammer begins his quest to kind of just sort of set off into the world, and eventually he takes up the quest to seek out the Unsea Elixir. He is told by his spirit guide that there's an elixir out there that will allow him to unsee the things that he wishes he had not seen, that made him so grossed out by goblins, or other traits that he might get. And other actions you'll take will either add to or reduce your self-esteem, and sometimes there'll be random things where it'll tell you to roll one of your dice and click options 1 through 6, or maybe click here if you rolled a 1 through 5 or what have you. You'll also assemble a party of adventurers to travel alongside you. I managed to get two followers. One was Batilla Bearbane, who came in handy at one point when you'll have scenes where it's like you're up against you see a bear. Is Batilla Bearbane with you? And you'll click yes, and then she strangles the bear to death. So the way the game actually plays out is very humor based and very jokey. There's lots of kind of fantasy and movie references. It's kind of with humor games, it's always tough to say okay, this is going to land for you or this isn't. But this one definitely had me laughing. Oh, there's a great scene in there where my favorite choice in the game came up. Hang on, let me look at my notes. Yeah, okay, so the game, he was trying to decide, I had to choose where to go looking for the temple that would contain the unsee elixir, and I might do either ask a wizard or ask a lizard. So, of course, I chose ask a lizard. And so you go off to a village of lizard people, and there's a scene where you walk into the street and there's someone saying, "Flies for sale," shouts a street vendor. "Get your leggy, juicy flies here, fresh from the stench farms." "Hot rocks," shouts another. "Hot rocks, selling like hotcakes." "More flies for sale," shouts a third, different stall holder. "They're a staple food, so our economy can easily support more than one business that sells them. Get your flies here." "The world building in this place is a little heavy-handed. You decide." At the temple of Nepthine, and you decide to get out as quickly as possible. So it's full of lots of dumb jokes like that. There is a lot of branching to this, so I think this is a good game if you appreciate that kind of implementation and choice-based stuff. All in all, this was probably my second favorite game that I've played so far for the comp.
Wow, yeah, that's awesome.
Really, really good one.
I have another sort of Dungeons and Dragons-y fantasy-y game to talk about a little later. So I'm excited that seems to be a theme, or at least I don't know if 2 makes a theme in a pool of over 80 games, but that sounds really fun. The next game that I wanted to talk about real quick was a game from Provodnik Games. It's called Dull Grey. So last year, I actually really quite liked the game that they entered last year, which was called Railways of Love. It's both this game and that game are translations from Russian, and they're using their own kind of custom interface that I think looks really nice. And this game is set in the same setting as Railways of Love. That was they have a setting that they call their progress program setting. So it's sort of this far future version of Russia with sort of like fully automated robot communism in full force, you know? So it's an interesting setting. It really reminds me of what little I know or have read about their writing in general. Reminds me of what I know or have read about like Russian literature. And this game is a bit different from last year's. Last year's Railways of Love was sort of a conversation on a train, and you were mostly it had an interesting sort of choice style where you were mostly making choices as if you were sort of playing as fate, was the way they phrased it. And you were trying to effect a conversation between two people who were sort of potentially romantic partners, but you were trying to sort of nudge them through the order of events, like whether the tea cart would come by at a certain time, that kind of thing. This game, its sort of interactivity is like a bit lower than that game, but in a very interesting way. It's about a young boy growing up in a sort of a remote outpost that is, he's growing up without a father, and his mother is having to make a choice for him. In this setting, at a certain age, children are offered by the Progress program a choice of professions, and he's given two choices: lamplighter or tallyman. And in the context of the Progress program setting, those aren't quite what they sound like. Lamplighter is a very dangerous job, and his father died doing it. Tallyman is a sort of working for the government kind of job that potentially carries with it a certain distaste as sort of working against your own people in a sense.
Pretty sure a tallyman primarily tallies me bananas.
Yes, that is correct. But
I feel really bad about that joke.
Bananas are extinct. This is the far future. There's no more bananas under Progress program.
Okay.
So
right.
Anyway, the thing that's very interesting about this is that you only ever get to make one choice in this game, but you make it over and over again. The choice is, the game will play out a scene, and then the mother gets to choose between lamplighter or tallyman. And then some more scenes will play out. Maybe maybe an uncle comes to visit and he talks about what it means to be a tallyman, and then it comes up in the conversation, well, what have you decided to choose? And then again, the mother has to choose lamplighter or tally man. Maybe another scene plays out. A relative comes to visit. She's expressed some distaste for the tally man role or job, and then the mother walks in again, and it comes up again in conversation. Well, what will you be choosing? And the mother has to choose lamplighter or tally man. That's the only choice you get to make throughout the entire game, but you make it several times. And it's interesting because it's kind of the really restricted choice here. Restricted ability to make choices in the game feels like it's very closely thematically related with the sort of restricted choice that these people have under progress program, right? So I thought that thematically that very much worked for me. And the writing was also quite good here too. I remember so similar to last year's Railways of Love, these games are both translations from Russian, and any translation, the writing is as good as its translation. The translations of both games were quite good. Last year's, I felt had more sort of standout lines. I remember being sort of floored by the ending that I got in Railways of Love, and the way that it, I just thought it was really, really good language. And whereas this game, I just don't think I found any moments where I was like, that's such a perfect phrase or anything like that. I still quite liked the writing, but I don't think it quite stood out to me, or there were no like shining little golden phrases in this the way that there were in last year's game. But this game was differently presented. It was clearly sort of a more involved production. They've got some animations they've added to to their interface. They've changed their art style from a pixel art style to this very cool looking, sketchy looking black and white renderings that they art, and they've added there's more of a soundtrack to this. It's quite a good, well-presented thing. And the thing that probably surprised me the most about it was that it seems like you have this very restricted set of choices, right? And so I was expecting that this game had 2 endings, right? Lamplighter or tally man. But as it turns out, at the end of the game, it presents you a screen that tells you what other players chose. Like this, 10% of players chose your option, or here's what. And there are 2, 3, 4, 5 different endings. And I had no idea that the game had that level of choice. There's you can become an unhappy lamplighter or a happy lamplighter, an unhappy tally man or a happy tally man, or a different destiny. And that different destiny, only 1% of players when I played the game had been able to find it. And that's really, really fascinating to me, because this game, like, that is cool from an interactive standpoint, but it's also cool from a thematic standpoint, where like they only have this one choice to make, and yet within the context of the game, there are multiple sort of ways out, even within that extremely restricted choice space, right? I don't know how repeatedly making the same choice again and again and again, little Kirill, escapes his destiny as a lamplighter or a tally man and finds a different destiny. I'd probably have to play the game multiple times in order to find that out, but I think it's very cool. When I saw that screen, I was like, oh, maybe these characters living under this incredibly repressive regime that is restricting their choice actually have more choices within that than it seems like. And I thought that was a cool message for the game to deliver as a kind of a final note after it's the end, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Cool game.
It's also interesting to me. This is the second game that you have talked about that you were like, I did not realize as I was playing that there was as much choice as there actually was.
I wonder if that's saying that that's like people doing good writing, or if I'm just really oblivious.
Yeah, I actually didn't
mean
Maybe
if you like change your font size, you'll see all the buttons. That
I actually did not mean it that way, but that is funny. Maybe you're just bad at these things, but I think it's more like, I don't know. Maybe that's the next evolution of these styles of games, right? I'm thinking of like a Telltale game where you don't actually realize that you're making critical choices throughout the game, but you're just playing it in the way that feels right to you, right? Yeah. That's a interesting concept that I'd be interested to hear or to see more games start to explore, to try to hide the decision making in the like, I'm just going to do what I think I'm supposed to do, right? And then it would be interesting to see what each individual thinks like you're supposed to do. Now, of course, upon repeated playing, you start to learn the system, and that would start to break down a little bit. But I think generally speaking, when you're playing a game that has choices, it's pretty freaking clear that you're making choices, right? But this is twice now that you've said, I didn't realize I was making as many choices as I was.
It is kind of counter to the most common experience I think game developers are trying to create, which is the illusion of having tons of choice.
Right.
Having lots of choice and having that be kind of masked as being directed.
Well,
is pretty.
It's kind of like Gone Home, which we just talked about, right? Like, there's a million different ways to have your path through the game, but probably the vast majority of people actually have roughly the same path because of how the game is laid out, right?
Yeah. And all of this is true, and I love that it plays with that. But like what strikes me the most about this is that it's extremely well deployed here, because this is a game that's thematically about the restriction of choice, right? And so kind of lining that up with this, I really think it's cool. Not everything about this game lands perfectly for me. Like I thought, like their last work, and I don't know how much of this to blame on the translation. It's some of its language is clunky, and even when it's not clunky, it's occasionally not quite connecting me. But I don't know. Something about the work these guys do is really cool to me, and I hope we see more stuff from them.
Awesome. Yeah, same. So the last game that I'm going to talk about is a game called Rip Retold by Hippolyto?
One of those.
Hippolyto? Yeah. And it's a really funny, I think actually a very funny concept, though it's not really played for humor. If you're familiar with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, it's like imagine that, but for Rip Van Winkle. Huh. So imagine the story of Rip Van Winkle, but told from the perspective of a kid who's in the town who happens to have sort of a tangential interaction with Rip Van Winkle before he goes and sits under a tree and falls asleep for 20 years. And that's the whole perspective of the game, is of this kid who sold a candy apple to Rip Van Winkle right before he went and fell asleep for 20 years. And how the town responded to this dude just being asleep under a tree for 20 years, how he responded, how the neighborhood responded, how Rip Van Winkle's wife responded. It's a very, very funny concept. And I really, really appreciate that. And I think there's like a deep well of stories that take that thing of, it's again, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, of the angle on a main character story from any other viewpoint other than the main character is almost always going to be funny, right? Because it's almost always a ridiculous thing that happens. So imagine just seeing it from someone else's perspective. But what stood out to me about this game is that it doesn't really play it for humor. I mean, there's some stuff. There's some stuff that's kind of funny, but I think it actually tries to play it for like the emotional impact of like, imagine you just met a guy who seemed very charming and let you in on a little secret, which is part of the game and I won't spoil, and then he just goes and falls asleep for 20 years. And you know his wife, and you know the town, and you know the doctor that tried to like resuscitate him or wake him from his sleep, and you are like really ingrained in this town, and this guy just went and fell asleep. I almost wish that it played for the humor. It kind of tries to go down the middle, and it's very short. So I feel like I wish it would have been either more emotional or more funny, and it just tries to play it right down the line. And I think it suffers a little bit for that, but the idea is is great. And I enjoyed that probably more than I liked the game itself. But I think that's really it. It's a really funny idea. It's a really interesting idea. If you want to see what this writer does with like how the town would respond and how like the wife would respond and what that would be like, check it out.
The last game I really want to talk about is one that I think is going to get a lot of fans. It has a title and an image. All the games in IFComp have a little cover image that is going to draw in a lot of the sort of people that are looking around online trying to pick something. And this is the game For the Cats by Lee. And For the Cats is first off, the picture is a little cute kitten. When I think about making a hook for a game, I run D&D a lot, and it's always challenging to come up with a hook that's going to motivate everybody to do something. It's something I talk about. We've talked about this recently, Nate, just the idea of making a hook for your adventure. For the Cats is a lovely branching narrative that has the perfect hook, which is you are outside of your home and you see a kind of a street vendor with a cage full of kittens. And there's some kind of implied animal abuse going on, and you decide to save the cats. So, first off, I was 100% on board. Yes, I want to save these cats. And then the game kind of makes another great first step, puts its best foot forward by being one of a few pieces of interactive fiction that lets you choose your character to play as. And the character descriptions are immediately things that will draw you in. And you'll not only will you want to save these cats, but you'll want to choose one of these characters that speaks to you. And the three character descriptions are terrific. One is a factory worker, gray as grass. You're strong enough to live in this town, but not strong enough to fix it. The second one is a housewife living her life from one homemade meal to another. You know how to wait. You know how to smile. You know your place. You forgot your voice. And the third is an artist seeking inspiration from the industrial landscape of the city. At least that's the official version. You don't talk about your past. In fact, you avoid talking whatsoever. And for each of these different characters, you can choose from many different paths on your quest to rescue these cats. And you go on to learn about the world around you as well. I decided to run as the factory worker and wound up going back to the factory where I used to work. Reveals he did not work there anymore. And there were a lot of choices involved in getting here, but essentially I just asked a couple of guys from the factory to come and help me rescue the cats. But the world around you seems to be kind of a rundown post-apocalyptic world, and there are no cats in this part of the world, and why, and the plants aren't growing and things like that. So the writing itself was really interesting. Like it's one of these games that gives you just a little bit about the world and a lot about the characters. And the choices that it gives you are really excellent. There are 10 different endings. Some of them are exclusive to some of the characters, and some of them are things you get to from any of the characters. But I think it's definitely very replayable for the reasons of multiple endings, multiple playable characters. And I really liked the dialogue and the writing. Like, I didn't know totally what I was expecting going into this, because when I got to the part where I was kind of at the factory talking to some of my old coworkers, I was almost expecting maybe there'd be some kind of like puzzle. Am I going to have to sneak around? But no, you just ask these guys for help, and they come down and basically threaten the guy threatened this cat seller by kind of flashing some factory documents and making up something about cat diseases and saying the cats are impounded, and then you've saved the cats, and now it's your job to think about how to care for 7 cats. And the last line of the story was saying it was almost as if to say that this character, in saving these cats, was going to turn his own life around, and he was thinking about ways that he could grow some green grass for the cats to walk on. And I really loved it. It was a really beautiful, lovely narrative, and I think it was written very simply and very effectively.
Wow. That's kind of not what I was expecting, actually. So that really makes me want to give it a try.
Yeah, no, this game was absolutely not what I was expecting in a really good way. It really surprised me. I'm going to play it again.
Awesome. Well, the last game that I have to talk about this week is one that I haven't 100% finished yet. So, take that for what it is, but it's one that I'm very motivated to finish, and I've played enough of it now that I'm pretty sure I can talk about it. And that's Dungeon Detective 2, Devils and Details by Wong-A-Lot. So I didn't play Dungeon Detective 1 last year. I think it won it was 15th or 16th place or something like that in the comp last year. Don't hold me that. I might have the numbers wrong. I looked it up a while ago, but I've forgotten. But anyway, this game, I didn't play that game. It did look cool at the time. I was excited to check it out, but just never quite got to it. And so I wanted to make sure that I played this one. And I'm really glad that I did. It's a really neat game. It's Shane. I think you will like it a lot because Shane, you are because you're obviously you're into D&D. This takes place in a very D&D like setting and includes a lot of D&D like characters. If you're not familiar from the first game, this game stars Detective Sniff Chewpaw, who is the world's first dungeon detective, and he's also a gnoll. And if you're not a D&D person, gnolls are basically Shane, you're more of the D&D person.
Sure.
What are gnolls?
A gnoll is a I want to say it's a hyena demon servant of a god named Inogu, who's like a chaos god, something like that.
Yep.
Or a demon.
Well, it doesn't specifically talk about the gods that they worship in this, but it does talk somewhat about gnoll society. I think that this game sort of downplays the man-eating nature of gnolls. In D&D, gnolls are terrifying.
That's 100% of their thing.
Yeah, 100% of their thing is they eat people, right? Whereas in this...
yes, and turn them into... gnolls?
I guess? I don't know.
Hyenas?
In this, they are, fuzzy hyena men. And it talks somewhat about their society, which is all about, fighting and living with your... it doesn't call it a pack. It had some other very cool name for it that I'm now forgetting, and I wish I could remember it because I like a lot of the world building stuff in this. But this detective Sniff Chewpaw left his pack or whatever it's called, and his spot mother, which is the mother that oversees the pack, and decided to go out on his own and become a detective and solve crimes in the city. And it does a lot of really good world building right off the bat. So the case, you're not required to have played the first game in order to enjoy this. I'm sure it would help in some ways, but I'm not feeling like I'm missing out on anything. This game takes place, the first scene, you are discussing your new case with your client, who is a devil. And he is aggrieved. He's a devil, Marathonus. And he is aggrieved because someone has exploded a bomb in his dungeon beneath the city. And he doesn't know who, because he doesn't have any enemies, because he's so beloved. He is the beloved philanthropist devil of the city that this all takes place in. And no one has anything bad to say about him. Oh, yes, he's a devil, but all of his contracts are fair and easy to read. And he only takes souls when people are really completely consenting and informed. And so you've set out to try and he's really upset that someone exploded his home. And so you're trying to solve the crime. And it all plays out in a choice-based way. It has a nice UI. There's a couple things it does that I thought were cool. It's got an inventory that appears on screen at all times that doesn't just include the things you're carrying, but also pieces of evidence. So things like people's testimony will appear in your inventory. once you've talked to the right people, and you're basically trying to go around the city. It's got a day and night cycle, so you can explore the same places by day and by night, and you're trying to find pieces of evidence to collect together. Once you've found all of the evidence and you've picked a suspect, you can then return to Marathonus, and he will take that information to the magistrate. I haven't 100% found all of the evidence yet. There are a few things about it that are kind of bugging me. It's clear that this is a sort of advancement of a lot of things about the first game. So I don't know how this compares to that game. I do have a couple of nits to pick. One is that I found navigating around in this game kind of annoying. The city that you're navigating, it's not like, huge, but there's a number of different streets. But the way that they're connected isn't very obvious. Even it doesn't even really tell you things like, north, south, east, west. It just says, from here you can go to this street or this street. From that street you can go to this street or that street. I wasn't drawing maps because it didn't really seem that was something I was supposed to be doing. But I found it really kind of tricky and annoying to get around without, memorizing, okay, this street connects to this street, connects to this street, connects to this street to get from point A to point B. And there's no way to say, okay, let me just go back to the place I was earlier. You have to go through all of the intermediate locales. And every page, when you go to one of those intermediate locales, reads out all of its text to you. And, so I found just sort of the act of navigating around a little annoying, particularly when it's clearly meant for you to navigate around the same areas several times because you're supposed to, at the very least, visit most of these places both by day and by night. I don't know. I'm kind of stuck near the, well, not stuck. I still have a couple of leads to follow, but getting down towards the very end of the game, I'm finding it tricky to know what to do next. I've got the broad strokes, I think, but I'm not just quite sure. Okay, what other evidence do I need to find? I was getting a little frustrated and checked the walkthrough. And just in case you're curious, the walkthrough doesn't really tell you anything about the process of collecting evidence. It only really tells you about what some of the multiple endings. So the stuff in the walkthrough is really only for extreme late game when you've already finished collecting all of your evidence. But I otherwise would say this game, I'm gonna finish it because I'm really, really enjoying it. I like a lot of the characters. Marathonus, the devil, is really funny. There's a paladin in the town that is just a really, I love paladins, and this was a really well written paladin who's just really confused by the fact that this devil, everyone seems to like them so much. Surely something is up there, right? There's a setting in the game where there's a chess parlor that's like a seedy chess parlor, and I thought that was very amusing. I don't know. I like a lot about this game. I like a lot about its world building. I think it's really cool. So it's one of my highest recommends so far, although I really wish that the active investigation was a little smoother and that some of the, hinting for where to go next was a little better. There is a magic necklace that you get that talks to you psychically and will occasionally give you hints. But I found almost none of its hints actually useful. They were vague to the point of uselessness. So, when I'm walking around trying to figure out what to do next, the necklace will offer something completely unactionable. So I would say if things I would like to see improved in this, I would like to either see something like an in-game map or a much clearer relationship presented between the locations and how to get from point A to point B, or maybe even a fast travel option. Let me just go back to the magistrate office or whatever, and don't have to click through 7 places in between. But apart from those little nits that I've already picked probably more than they deserve, this is a really good game. I recommend it.
Hey, I forgot one game that I played that I thought was really interesting for a few reasons that I definitely do want to talk about before we wrap up.
Okay.
This is a game that is really timely and brought to my attention a term that I had not known before. This is a game called Fleegscam Simulator. Fleegscam, which I had to look up the pronunciation on, Flygsskam, is a Swedish word. This is Fleegscam Simulator by Katie Benson. This is a Swedish word meaning flight shame. And it is kind of a trend, I guess, so kind of around climate activism right now. And, you'll see this, I guess, attached to news articles about Greta Thunberg. Is this sort of idea of that it's shameful to fly, or that one should avoid flying to reduce your carbon footprint. So the idea of Flygsskam is flight shame, and the idea that it's not a good thing to be flying everywhere. So in what seems to me in this game like a genuine attempt to give you an idea of what it might be like to take a bus trip from London to Hamburg rather than flying when going on vacation. This game gives you kind of a choice-based narrative that takes you on exactly that bus trip, and it can end in quite a few different ways, but it is a very straightforward walkthrough of what that experience is like. And it does have some kind of elements of the sublime and also of the very basic and practical. So, you want to make sure that you don't do anything that might get you stranded at a bus station, like, wander around too long while the bus is stopped somewhere. And, you might, if you strike up a good conversation with your neighbor on the bus, you might fall in love, or you might just spend the entire trip playing games on your phone and sleeping. Like, these are both possibilities in this simulation. So except for the fact that this references the concept of Flygsskam, this really is not a game that feels like it's trying to beat you over the head with a political message about climate change or something. It really does feel like, okay, here's what the experience of taking the bus on this trip that I would say most people would probably fly for looks like, and here's some of the things that you might see or do along the way. And it's frank about the fact that the experience of being on a bus for a long time or overnight is kind of a cramped experience, and you'll maybe have to make some choices, like, do I sleep or do I stay up late playing games on my phone and stuff like that. So honestly, I thought it was interesting. I kind of would like to know more about where this game kind of comes from, because it seems like it's connected to some big ideas, but it tells a very grounded and simple and personal story, and gives you a very kind of matter-of-fact walkthrough. But then there's also these moments in there where it's like, okay, you could decide to, you could fall in love with your seatmate and decide to get off the bus early and explore the world wherever they're going. So it is kind of beautiful and very simple, and I liked it.
That's really neat. That's all we've got for this week. I am really enjoying playing these this year. As always, I love IFComp season. So I'm looking forward to doing another episode on this very soon. Our next episode, so next week, won't be another IFComp episode. We'll be doing our Halloween episode. We always try and usually fail because of scheduling, but this year we're going to make it to do a horror or spooky game around the Halloween season. So next week, we're, I believe, going to be playing Observation. It came out earlier this year, and it's by a developer that I think is pretty darn cool. Maybe some interactive fiction synergy here. If you played Stories Untold, or its very, very cool first chapter, which was called The House Abandoned, which is a horror interactive fiction piece that was done with really high production values for a text adventure, and was just one of the most effective horror pieces of IF that I have played. I highly recommend it, and it's part of the larger collection. It's called Stories Untold. Probably the best part, actually. Anyway, that same developer released a game this year that you may or may not have seen. It's called Observation. We're going to be playing it and discussing it. I'm excited to talk about it. And then after that, we'll be returning with more IFComp. So probably one more IFComp episode before the end of the competition. Although if we find time, we may do a little more than that. We'll see. So if you have games that you think are particularly good out of this year's comp, and you want to make sure that we cover them, we are all ears. You can get in touch with us on our website, www.theshortgame.net, or you can find us on Twitter @_shortgame. Or, of course, you can find us on our patron-only Discord. So if you go to patreon.com/theshortgame and support us at any level, $1 a month or higher, then you'll get access to our exclusive Patrons Discord, where we talk about the games that we're playing in real time as we're playing them and as we're prepping for episodes. We talk about other stuff that isn't video games or isn't short games. We're having a great conversation about IFComp stuff as things go there, and we'd love to hear from you there. It's a great place to have full conversations rather than fitting everything into a tweet. So please do support us there. I'm Reagan Kelly. You can find me on the internet @ReaganK. That's RayGanK. Shane, where can people find you?
I'm also on Twitter @8bitshane.
And Nate, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter @NateSTL. Also want to take a moment to shout out a new $5 patron member of the short list. If you're unfamiliar with what that is, it gets you into a special channel on our Discord. Also, we've been asking this group for insight on the things that they might want to see in the future from our Patreon. What new features you may want, what new offerings you may want from us. So shout out to Matt Cromarty for joining that tier. We deeply appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Matt. And thanks, of course, to all of our patrons and all of our listeners and anyone participating in IFComp, all of the authors, all of the readers and judges. Thank you all, and thank you for listening.
And you.
Yes, and you, listener, and thank you for listening to The Short Game.